How's it going, YouTube? Come in today with another video, and today, guys, the video is going to be how to sideboard, the art of siding. This is really important, especially at a tournament, because most of your games you play post-side, so this is something that you really have to understand, and there's going to be a lot to unpack here, because the amount of talk when it comes to siding is just so long, right? There's so many things to discuss, and there's a lot of different nuances that can change how you side, why you side things on the fly, because sometimes you know that there's going to be a specific deck, but you don't know why they're playing certain cards, so then you have to like adjust. There's a lot of different things to consider when you are going to side, so I really do hope that this clarifies a lot of that for you, and it really gives you a bit of a guide moving forward to understand when you side, why you side. So if you haven't already checked out my sponsors over on Gem, Dragonshield, Imperium, ChainLink, Grimoire, or Cloud, definitely go ahead and check them all out down in the description below. Sorry if my voice is a little off. I've been sick for a couple of days now. It's been pretty bad, so I've been trying to get this video up, but it's taken me a minute. So I do hope that you enjoy this nonetheless. A lot of very valuable information from this video, and I really am excited to bring you this because I love siding. There's so much to say about it, so let's hop right into my first topic. Alright, so when it comes to siding, there's a couple contributing factors, and there's more than these, but I think these are probably the most important in my opinion. The number one thing is going to be deck choice. So deck choice is going to be huge here, because if your deck only has so many things that it can do going second, i.e. can't really play going second into a board, then your side's going to have to cater a little bit harder to you going second, so like a lot more blowouts. If your deck is fine going first and second, then maybe you have a bit more flexibility to play cards like Xyz Encore and what have you to go ahead and break very specific boards. Talking more so about main deck non-engine space. A lot of times in our sides, we see cards like Droll and Lockbird, we see Lancia, but there's been a couple formats where Lancia has been in the main deck. There's been a lot of formats even now where Droll's in the main deck. So if your deck can cater to main deck some of those cards we usually see in the sideboard, then again, your side's going to be a lot more flexible into the meta because you have a lot more non-engine room into your main deck. The last thing is going to be the current meta. Now, this changes by the week, it feels like, but your side deck has to cater to the meta and what is going on. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we look at some sample deck lists to really go over what it means to have a sideboard for the meta. So you have 15 side cards, and this is something that I really like to bring up. I brought this up before. So the way that I look at my side, and this isn't like black and white because siding's never black and white, but this is something that I use as kind of like a guide to really help me understand like what I want to do with my sideboard. So since there's 15 slots, what I typically like to do is I'll go like 5 slots for going first, 5 slots for going second, and then 5 just utility slots. You can also do that as like 6 going first, 6 going second, and then 3 utility slots. It just depends on if you're playing play sets of everything or like 2 ofs, right? But at some point, I like to have at least a small amount of room for like a utility card. Sometimes that's Solemn Judgment, sometimes that's Droplet. Going first cards, D-Barrier, Floodgates, goes in, there can be what have you. Going second cards, you have your Lightning Storms, your Duster, and maybe like an Evenly Matched or like a Super Poly. And then you always have a small bit of room for a card that just helps you out in a specific matchup, one that just kind of blanket covers a lot of the format, like maybe like a Zombie World and Banshee, what have you. So these are things to really consider whenever you're looking at your sideboard. You want cards for going first, you want cards for going second, but you also want very versatile cards like Book of Moon, Book of Eclipse. So moving and talking about finding the right side card. So again, it's going to be really catered to what your deck is trying to do and what the format is looking like. So like if your deck, for example, doesn't lose hard to being under a Lancia, a lot of situations Lancia can be really impactful. Same with like a Rivalry of Warlords or even like an Evenly Matched if your deck doesn't necessarily need a battle phase. This is going to be one of those decks that has a hard time going second anyway, so you play cards like Evenly Matched to be able to help your board get a little bit more evenly matched, right? So that's going to be something that you really want to consider. Whenever it comes to siding and finding the right side card, a lot of times too is going to be more so what you're struggling with against the meta. So like let's say there's like one deck that's really popular in the room and you just can't beat it otherwise, so you're going to side a little heavier for that deck and maybe main deck a hand trap that helps you beat that deck too. So like, for example, Tier still has a hard time with Pearly. So if you're siding Droll and Xyz Encore, you're siding a little bit harder to beat Pearly, but the Xyz Encore also can dip over into like Dweller matchups. So it's nice and it's versatile, but you are siding a little bit harder for your worst matchup. Talking about how you decide what goes into your sideboard. So this is the sideboard that I used at the case tourney that I went 10-1. It was 2 separate tournaments, which was really cool. I played a lot of games and my sideboard was really helpful. So looking at a bit of an example as versatility, going first, going second, Tier already has a very good time going first and second. So you don't really have to put your side deck into like a structure. You can kind of put it into whatever you feel like is going to be the most necessary at the time. So one thing to consider is that Tier doesn't have access to things like hand traps. Typically, my deck did this time around, but siding into hand traps is really impactful because it gives you an edge when your opponent's not expecting them. You also just are able to shut a lot of things down like dwellers. So having things like the imperms on the side, the Lanciers on the side was fine to really be able to make sure that I just didn't lose randomly to something, right? Having the Guilty Gearfried here for rescue, you can side the extra deck card. I think that it's okay to do only ever so often. Siding like a Dweller, if you cannot fit it into your extra deck for when you're specifically going first, is kind of the same logic as putting it like a there can be only one, because you're putting it in specifically for going first and it's not being summoned otherwise. I've seen a lot of people do that with Typhon or even a Zeus. So like once in a while it's fine, but usually you're only siding a side card if it's like for a specific situation that'll come up a lot, right? So like a Dweller would come up quite a bit for whenever you're going first. It's only if your extra deck is so tight that you couldn't fit it in. I highly recommend to not side extra deck cards, but only if you really need to. Typically you want to keep your side pretty versatile for the matchups that you're playing, because a lot of your games, most of your games are being played post side. So that's something to keep in mind. Back row blowout, I've always been a firm believer that you should have like 3 spots in your sideboard dedicated to back row blowout. We see a lot of people who have like a heartbeat in the main deck and they're deciding 1 duster, which is like fine. But at the same time, I feel like these cards just have such good coverage that keeping them in the side is still fine to do at all times. Typically, I have like 1 floodgate or like 1 very specific card that's just for me going first that I really do enjoy playing. Whether it be like 2 There Can Be in a Crime or like 3 Goes In, 3 Featherstorm, whatever you're playing, right? And then I have like 3 very specific cards for going second. So like a Duster and 2 Lightning Storm. So like those 6 slots are like always going to be 100% already made up for me. And then you have the rest of your sideboard ready to go, another 9 cards. So that's where I typically try to cater for the matchups that I think are going to be worse for me. So Pearly for sure, being able to put in the Xyz Encore is just rough whenever they're able to summon Noir. This is a big problem to deal with, and also being able to draw a lot of hand traps, something I really don't want to deal with. This also deals with Dweller. So this is something that had to have a spot in my sideboard. Same with Lancia. My worst matchup is Flu, and Lancia can make Flu pass turn. So I thought this was also something that I really wanted to make sure was in my deck list. So that's something just to kind of keep in mind. Another way to just kind of look at your side a little differently. I know this might be a lot all at once, but siding really doesn't have to be all too scary. It's like when you're going first, you want dedicated first cards. When you're going second, you want dedicated going second cards. But you also just want cards that are just good into any matchup that you could play against, right? Because you should just be expecting at a regional like rounds 5 to 9 to build your deck for. But there's still some variance in rounds 1 to 4 that you don't really want to plan for, but you want to have cards that also hit those matchups, right? So looking at the cash tier list that me and my friend built together, and then my friend took second place at the case tourney. Currently in tournaments, my friend is 13-1 with this deck list, so very, very cool. The deck itself is Kashtira. Clearly, the deck has been hurt pretty bad, but is still able to put in quite a bit of work. So looking a bit more at the main deck here, we see Ash, Droll, Imperm, and then we already see some hard-going second cards like the Kaiju, like the Econs, and the Talents. So these are cards that we're talking about are going to change the amount of siding that you do as far as the hard-going first or the hard-going second cards, because now your side's a bit more freed up to have a lot more versatility. Now, a difficult matchup could be Tier Limit in the tournaments that we typically go to. there's a lot of tier. Now, if you know that your tournament that you're going to has a high representation of a deck in a room, you want to make sure that you have enough to be able to beat that deck and not have to worry about it. So having the 3 Crow and the 3 Shifter is fine, because even if you side in both, you really want to see one of them. And even if you see this plus Shifter, it's fine because you shifted your opponent. Then if they were able to play through the Shifter, then you still have the Crow. So it's still perfectly all right. Looking more so at the rest of the side here, we see the 1 Lava and the 2 of the Kaijus. Now, we decided with the 1 Kaiju in the main deck, because it's a 7 that you can also normal summon off the Birth, that there was not a better 40th card, so we put the Kaiju in the main deck. So we're looking for like a 15th card in the side, and so we just put the Lava Golem in because it's already like a hard going second list. So having the 2 Kaijus and the Lava Golem just give you a bit more versatility on having like a tribute monster. Then having the Banshee and the 2 Zombie World, it's really good against Flu. It also doubles up against Tier, because Tier has to use monsters from hand unless they want to make a Garura, because everything turns into a zombie. So it's really solid if your opponent's milling out your deck and you mill the Banshee, banish Banshee, activate Zombie World. It puts your opponent in a really awkward position. So it's still really solid to have as well. Looking past that though, we have the Cosmic Cyclone. Again, 3 back row blow at some point. Even if it's a Cosmic, still all right. Very good card in general. So it still follows a bit of the formula. You have the versatility in the main deck though of having so many of the cards that you would just have in your side anyway into your main deck, so you have a lot more room to just be able to play with a more versatile side. The other thing too is like when you're siding, you can side to know that your opponent knows that you're gonna go first, or you can side to know that your opponent knows that you're gonna go second. And so then you can like side to beat their sideboard. So that's like siding in Cosmics to beat an anti-spell, right? If you know that like a D shifter is coming, then you could always side into like cross out in a D shifter, or if you know the D barrier is coming, you can go like cross out in the D barrier. So it's like a bunch of different kinds of siding, but like siding to beat their sideboard is also a very relevant kind of siding, which can be very confusing too. But basically it all boils down to, if you think that they're going to side in a card and it's very common in the format, it might not be a bad idea to anticipate that's coming in whenever you're putting in your side together, so that you can at least have a better chance at winning. There's a lot of times where, like, for example, if I know Shifter's coming, that where I usually would side out like a Super Poly, I'd keep the Super Poly in, because at least that's a defensive card that I could draw, that I could at least put up like a Garura and then be able to play the game next turn. And the card that I pitched, if my Garura lives, then I get a draw for turn and I get the Garura draw as well. And then a potential SP scare. So definitely very, very cool. Talking about my cat toy list, you know, shout out to the comment section for the name. It was very, very cool. I loved putting this together. It was a lot of fun. This is another deck that you kind of have to change up your side a little bit more to cater to what deck you're playing. We have the 3 Nib, the 3 Orange Light, and then the 2 of the Veiler. And then in the sideboard, we do have the Drolls and the Bishtals. So we do have the non-engine that we can side out for the non-engine. So typically that's the way that you want to think about siding too, is you really don't want to cut down on your engine as much as possible because you don't want to brick. So putting in non-engine for non-engine has always been really solid, because if you ever side in more than 6 cards, then you are risking seeing too many side cards. If you side in less than 6 cards, you're risking seeing no side cards. So that's kind of the sweet spot, is like you never really want to side over 6 unless you absolutely need to. Let's say it's just a really bad matchup for you and you have a lot of dead cards in your main deck. That's when you really want to make sure that you're siding out a ton to just make sure that you at least see something relevant to deal with the matchup. So your side also depends on what deck you're playing. So we're playing the Orange Lights in the main deck and a lot of fairies. So I am playing the Keldo and the Mudora based on the format, based on the deck. So it just makes sense to be able to side into those so we can pitch them out of our hand. The 3 back row blowout, and then we also have the Xyz Encore, because again, it does shut down the mirror match. This is overall a very good generic card in general that I do like being able to play. So I do hope that kind of clarifies a little bit more about siding. It always depends a little bit more on what deck you're playing, what format you're in, and then what kind of non-engine room you have in your main deck that's going to allow for a lot of versatility in your side deck versus only a very few cards that you actually have the chance to play. Because some are just mandatory that you have to, like some back row blowout, maybe like a Floodgate, playing like Droll even because of like Monodome. and then you have like maybe 3 cards that you can actually play that maybe you want to, like a Mistaken Arrest. But other than that, your side gets pretty tight whenever you're going to a big tournament and you know exactly what kind of decks you're playing against. Well, if it did help you out, definitely let me know down in the comments below. I'm definitely interested to hear what you have to say. Siding is very complicated and it's very fun at the same time. Sometimes you do just side out the 3rd copy of everything. So if you play like 3 Prosperity, you side out like the 3rd Prosperity. If you're playing like Chimera, you side out like the 3rd Chimera Fusion. What have you. So it's always like the 3rd copies, or you're just siding out non-engine for non-engine typically. If you haven't already checked out the Discord, Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, or my Medify page, definitely go ahead and check it all out down in the description below. Thank you all so much for 20,000 subscribers, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Thank you.